G'day everyone, welcome back to another video. Thanks for tuning in. In my last video you saw me build this kitchen cabinet frame on the driver's side of the bus, and the next job that I'm going to do is to cut the ply for the various shelves that I've got inside the cabinet here, and then I'm going to hopefully install the bench top. It is stinking hot today again in Queensland. We've had some shocking weather this summer. So I'm not sure how much I'll get done today because I'm already sweating and it's not even 9 o'clock in the morning. But I'm going to just see how much I can get done because I'm going a bit stir crazy not being able to do as much on the bus the last few weeks. So anyway, let's give it a go and see how far we get. So I've got a few shelves to cut for this cabinet, and you can see where they're going because they're going to be resting on all these pieces of aluminium angle that I've got in the frame, and there'll be different thicknesses based on, you know, what I'm going to be putting on top of them, because I'm trying to keep my weight down as much as possible. So ideally I want like as thin a ply as I can get away with for the shelves, but a couple of them, especially these ones here, are going to need to support quite a bit of weight. This one on the bottom is where I'm going to store my binding machine, and it weighs about 25 kilos. The one on the top here, I'm going to have my printer and my little embossing machine and a few other things, so that'll also be a little bit weighty. So I'm going to actually use 12mm ply for these shelves here, and hopefully that'll be sufficient. It's a reasonable size span across here too, so I want to have something that's not going to bow too much under the weight. So I'll do the 12mm ply because I've got some scraps of that around, and I'll see how we go with that. This one here under the sink, it's actually going to be a little bit different. Eventually when I install the sink, the drainage pipe and the waste are going to be going sort of down through this shelf here. So eventually I'll be actually cutting like a bit of a notch and a hole out of the back section of this shelf, so it'll be more like a U shape. But for now I'm just going to cut it square. And it doesn't have to be as strong as these ones because I've actually got these plastic storage containers that I bought from Bunnings that are the perfect size for this. As you can see, they're just about the full depth of the cabinet here, and I've done the shelf in such a way that I should be able to get two of these, one on either side of the sink waste. So that's my plan. These are super lightweight. And, you know, I can obviously only put small things in here, but I'm thinking things like dishwashing, like scouring pads and dish brush things, and, you know, just maybe some tea towels and lightweight things in there. So this shelf here doesn't have to be super strong, but again, it's a fairly big span across here. It's almost 600 millimeters. So I don't want to use something too thin because I don't want it to bow. So I'm going to try with 9mm ply and see how that goes, and hopefully that will be strong enough for that one. And then these two little ones over here on this side, again, I'm going to be using these same containers, and in actual fact these containers just rest perfectly on the aluminium angle, so really I don't need anything across here. I could potentially even get away with something like 3mm ply, and that's actually what I'm going to try to start with because I've got lots of scraps of the 3mm. So I'm just going to do that first. If that proves to be not quite strong enough, then I can go to a 7mm shelf. But I'm just going to try the 3mm first and see how it goes, because the angle, because it's so close together here, the aluminium angle strips are actually going to be what's supporting the weight of these anyway. So that's the plan. I'm going to go and get the table saw out and start cutting plywood. Okay guys, well, I've got all the shelves in. Obviously I need to clean them up a bit. They all need to be sanded back and stained or painted or whatever. But for now I just wanted to get them in there because I wanted to make sure I had the right size while I had full view before I put the bench top on. So they all fit, so I'm happy with that. These 12mm ones are super solid, so I'm very happy with those. This 9mm one I think is pretty good. I'm not sure how it'll go when I cut a bit out of the middle of it, like when it's a U shape, because it won't have you know, the full width across the back to support itself. So I'll just have to see how that goes. I may end up having to use a thicker ply or maybe put a little bit of extra support at the back. I'm not sure, and I won't know that till I've cut the thing out for the sink. So, but for now that can stay. And I've got these two little shelves in here. As you can see, I mucked up a bit here and forgot that while I had the right width to accommodate those storage trays in here, I forgot that I needed to put a hinge in here, and it kind of needs to go about this spot here. So I've just had to cut this aluminium angle, this piece here off to make it a bit shorter, and I've just cut a notch out of this shelf to accommodate the hinge, which is going to have to go kind of in there. So that looks a bit shitty, but I mean, I'm the only one who's going to see it, so I'm not too worried about it. And I really wanted to fit those two storage trays in there. That's just the 3mm ply, and it's actually really solid. Like, it's not bowing at all, and I can put a fair bit of weight on that. So I'm just going to leave that for now. Happy with all that. The next thing I'm going to do is just put a few extra bracing pieces like this on the top of this cabinet frame, so that I've got plenty of places to screw up from underneath into the bench top when I come to put that on. And there it is. So I put in a few extra pieces here, so I'll be able to attach the bench top from underneath in those, and same on the other side. This was a bit tricky because I've got, if I take this shelf out, you know, I've got the aluminium angle quite close together at this end, and so getting the drill up under here is going to be a bit tricky. So I thought, rather than trying to go like closer to the edge of the bench top where I'm just not going to be able to get the drill around all of this, I'm just going to have these screws kind of in a fair bit, which should be okay. You know, there'll be probably this much of the bench top edge away from where the screw is. I think that'll be fine. I should be able to get the drill up in the middle there between the angle to get some screws in the middle of these. So I've done that. Yeah, so I'm just going to call it quits for the day there. It is super hot, and I'm starting to make mistakes with my measurements and things, and I do not want to muck up the bench top when I go to cut it, because I only have one piece big enough to do this bench, and it's quite expensive, that hardwood. So I'm going to leave the bench top for tomorrow in the morning when it's a bit cooler. Hopefully I'm a little bit more awake and alert, and hopefully less likely to make a mistake. Well, good morning everyone. It's another day, and hopefully it's benchtop day in the bus today. I'm starting a little bit earlier this morning because I want to try and get as much as I can done before it gets too hot to work out here. And I want to get this benchtop cut before the heat starts to fry my brain cells, because I can't afford to make any mistakes with this one. And I've even like drawn up a little list for myself, like a step by step, because there's a few things involved in putting this benchtop on. Some certain things have to be done before I can do other things. So I've got my list here so I know which order to do things in, and hopefully I won't have to go back and undo something in order to be able to do something else. But anyway, fingers crossed, by the end of today we'll have a bench top. Now this bench top I want to do pretty similar to this one. So as you can see, like, I've got the timber bench top, and I used the same timber pieces to create the splashback and this little return, and I want to do a similar thing over here. Now the way I did it on this cabinet was I basically just cut my bench top to size and pushed it up as far as it would go against the wall, and then I attached the splashback onto the top of the bench top. Now the problem with doing it this way is that because the walls slope inwards where the windows are, I couldn't push the splashback right back to the very edge of the bench. If you come around here, hopefully you can see. See, there's a little bit of a gap here where the splashback had to be set a little bit further forward from the edge of the bench, and that was the only way I could get the splashback to sit at 90 degrees. If I'd push the splashback right to the edge of the bench top, it'd be hitting this wall here and be sort of pushed inwards at the top, and I didn't want that. Now, doing it this way, insetting it from the edge of the bench, worked perfectly fine on this side of the kitchen because it didn't matter quite so much how deep this bench top was. This is only, in fact, about 500 millimeters deep, and it's just a workspace for me. I don't have to worry about fitting anything on top of it, so it didn't really matter if I used up a little bit of the bench space with the splashback. I can't do that over here, and the reason is because the timber that I use for the bench tops is only 600 millimeters wide, and so that's the maximum depth my bench top can be unless I want to start joining other pieces on, and I didn't want to do that. And I need all of that 600 millimeters to have enough space to install this big sink. So if I was to do what I did over here, if I was to just push the bench top right against the wall and then inset the splashback a little bit like I did on the other side, I'd actually be losing about 35 millimeters of bench space, and then I wouldn't have enough room to install my sink. So what I'm actually going to do on this side is install the splashback first, and then the bench will sit in front of that. So I'll just show you with these smaller pieces that I've got here. So I'm actually going to be putting the splashback down onto the cabinet there, and then the bench top will come up to the splashback like that, rather than the splashback sitting up here on top of the bench, if that makes sense. And that way I still have my full 600 millimeter deep bench top before it hits the splashback, and then that'll hopefully give me enough room to install the sink. Alright, so this is the bench top here that I'm going to be using, same as the other one. It's just an acacia hardwood panel from Bunnings. There it is there. And as you can see, I've already marked the line where I need to cut. So this here will be the kitchen bench top, and I've just put some tape on the top here just to protect the top of the bench from scratches with the jigsaw. So yeah, now I've checked the measurements a few times, so I hope I've got this right, because as you can see I'm not going to have enough left over to try again. So if I muck this up, I basically have to buy a whole new panel. So here we go. Well, there it is. It actually fits, so I didn't muck it up, thankfully. So I've just got it sitting here at the moment, and you can see how it's going to look in relation to the splashback. See how I've got the splashback actually sitting behind the bench top there. Now you'll see up this end, the splashback is just not quite as long as the bench, and I couldn't help that because that was the longest piece that I had left over from cutting this one. You know, that was as long as I could make the splashback. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put a tiny little bit on the end of it, and you won't see that because I'm going to have my water filter sitting here on the bench top, and so you won't even see this back corner here, so I'm not really worried about that. And I've got this bench top sitting out from the wall a little bit because I actually need to clad this bit of the wall before I put the bench top in. You can see on this side the bench top kind of comes up against the wall, and I just want to do it that way in case I ever need to get the bench top off. I don't want to have to take this wall apart to be able to get it out. So I'm going to actually clad a little bit of this wall first, and then the bench top will go up to it, and I've cut it at the right length so that at this end I'm going to be cladding the side of this cabinet just with 3mm ply, I've decided, to match the other side over there. And so when I do that, there'll just be a nice little 10mm overhang here, which is not huge, but just enough to have a nice little overhang, and it'll perfectly match the one on the other side. So yeah, so far I'm really happy with that. Now when I cut this return piece, I made sure to keep the other half of the piece that I cut, and as you can see, like, the curves perfectly match up. So now I can use this one as a template to draw the curve to cut out. Then that way the piece that I cut out for the other side will perfectly match the curve on this side. so far so good. So I've just got all the pieces just sitting there at the moment. So you can see I've cut out the little return piece and I've got the splashback here all just sitting there. I've clad this part of the wall just so that I can push the bench right up to it as far as it's going to go, so I can get it in the right position. Now, in order to attach the splashback and the return to the bench top, I'm going to need to do that outside the bus because I need to like screw in from the back and up from underneath. But before I do that, I actually need to cut the sinkhole in the bench top because I'll show you why. Okay, so this is roughly where the sink's going to be going, and the hole that I need to cut for this sink is actually only about 10 millimeters in from the edge of the sink all the way around. And you can see at the back here that the sink is already quite close to the edge of the bench, and there's actually only about 25, maybe 30 millimeters between the back of the bench top here and where I have to cut. And so it's just going to be too hard to get the jigsaw in there comfortably with the backsplash in place. It's going to be a lot easier to cut this sinkhole if this isn't attached. So I'm going to definitely need to cut the hole for the sink first. And so I need to work out exactly where that's going. And so to do that, I'm going to make sure I've got this bench top in the exact position that it's going to be sitting in. I'm going to clamp it onto the cabinet so it doesn't move, and I'm just going to come under here and mark underneath where the frame is, because the hole's going to be just sort of centered just inside this. So I'm going to mark underneath this side of the bench where that frame is, and then I can use that to position my sink. You guys, so I've got this sink sitting now exactly where I think I want it to go in respect to the bench top here. I'm just going to go ahead and mark it now before it moves. Yeah, now the IKEA instructions say firstly to draw the outline of the edge of the sink itself, and then the outline for the hole that gets cut is actually 10 millimeters inside of where the edge of the sink is. So I'm just going to go now and mark where the edge of the sink is, and then I'm going to take the sink off and mark out my hole line from there. This is really nerve-wracking. I actually think this is more nerve-wracking than cutting the bench top, because if I muck this up, I have to start again with a whole new bench. But anyway, I think I've got it in position. So here goes. So I can see my line for the sink, and now I need to mark 10 millimeters in from that and draw the line where the hole is going to be cut. Alright, so hopefully you'll be able to see this okay. You can see I've got 3 lines here. The dark black line is the line that I drew with the marking pen underneath the cabinet. So this is actually the underside of my bench top. And then this line in here was the edge of my sink, and I've just drawn another line 10 mil in from that, and this inner line is the line that I need to cut for the hole for my sink. So I'm going to go ahead now and tape that up and cut out that hole, and fingers crossed I have measured that right. Yeah, okay, we'll see. Okay, you guys, well, I think that's officially the roughest cut I've ever made with the jigsaw. It's a bit of a dog's breakfast. I might have to sort of do a little bit more to clean it up, but I just want to go and get the sink and see if it fits first. Just see where I'm at. Oh. Oh my god. Well, that actually seems to fit. Hopefully there's enough room underneath to get the clamps and everything on. But yeah, it actually worked out a lot better than I was expecting. Whew. All right. Well, now that I've done that, I can go ahead now and put the splashback and the return piece on the bench top, and then I can get it into the bus. I've just brought the bench top back into the bus because the trestle tables that I used to work on outside are not level, and the bench top was not sitting flat, and I need it to be absolutely flat when I come to screw the splashback in. So I've just brought it back into the bus here, and I've clamped it down onto my cabinet so I know that it's nice and straight. And now what I'm going to do is hopefully put some screws in here so that like the backsplash will be screwed into the bench here. Well, it's looking pretty good so far, guys. I'm happy with the splashback. I've just got it sitting in position here. I'm happy where the sink is. I might need to adjust this stud a fraction more, but I'll worry about that later on. I just need to put the little sliver, add the little sliver onto the end of the splashback here, and then I also need to secure this bit of the return in place. But I'm going to leave it at that for today because I'm getting a bit hot and tired. And I've managed to get this far without messing it up, so I'm going to leave it at that and we'll hopefully finish the rest off tomorrow. So before this bench top gets permanently installed, I just need to do a little bit more of the window trim in here because the splashback comes up to about here, and once the bench top's installed, I'm not going to be able to get down into that window to screw anything or nail anything in. So what I'm going to do is just put some little trim pieces on this bottom section so that it's just sort of below the height where the splashback's going to come up to, and then I'll be able to do the rest of the cladding when I do these sections after the bench top's installed. After a bit of trial and error, I've made up this template. I've just used a scrap of 3mm ply, and what I'm going to do is I'll show you this template. Just fits down in there like that, if you can see in there, goes up to the window, just helps to hide all the messy insulation that's inside the wall there. Ideally, what I would do, because the tongue and groove boards are going to be running horizontally around this window frame, the ideal would be to join a bunch of boards together like that and then cut the template like that so that you get that horizontal look. But I think that's just going to be too hard to screw a bunch of little pieces down in there. It would be much better just to put 1 or 2 screws in a single piece. And the reality is you're not going to see that part of the cladding because the splashback's going to be up here. You may, if you're sort of leaning right over the bench, see a bit of it in the reflection on the window. Honestly, I'm not that worried about it. So what I'm going to do is actually, I've got a piece of tongue and groove board here, so it's going to be the right thickness, and I'm just going to cut it like that, so it's actually one single piece. And then all of the pieces that you'll see above the splashback height I will do in the proper small sections of tongue and groove, but they'll be a lot easier to get my drill in there to screw the smaller sections in. For these 2 sections below bench height, I'm just going to do them as a single piece and see how that works. Alright, so there it is. I'm not sure if I can get the camera down there, but that's as good as that trim's ever going to get. I just put a piece of scrap pinch weld back along that little section of the window there too. Yeah, I mean, no one's going to look down there. The only time I'm going to be leaning over this far is if I want to clean out those drainage holes in this bit of the window here. So yeah, I'm happy enough with that. The rest of this I can clad afterwards after the bench top's in. Alright, and a couple more little jobs to do just before I put the bench top on. I've put this piece of aluminium angle across here now. And the idea of this is it's just going to give a little bit of extra support to that thin piece of bench top that's left when I cut the sinkhole at the back. That piece is actually feels pretty secure because it's actually kind of joined to the splashback as well, which is helping to support it. But I just wanted to get a little bit of extra support underneath it because I don't want that thin piece of bench top to be under any stress at all. So I've screwed just a piece of aluminium angle in here. This is 25mm angle and it's 3mm thick, so it is super strong, so it's perfect. And then you'll see I also ended up, this is the shelf under the sink that I'm going to be cutting into a U shape, and I just decided it would be a good idea to put an extra piece of angle at the back just so that when the hole is cut out of here, these 2 ends have something to help support them and they're not kind of falling in. So I've done all that. That shelf is ready to go. Alright, so back for another day, and I think today will be the day that I will actually be able to screw this bench top in place. But as usual, I make things hard for myself, and I've discovered an issue that I need to fix before I put the bench top in. And the problem that I have is related to these little things. These are the clamps that attach the sink to the bench top. So this is just the way IKEA sinks are installed. They're not just simply glued down into the top of the bench. They have these little clips that hook on underneath the sink and screw up underneath the bench top. And the idea is that they kind of go up under there and lock into the underside of the bench top and hold the sink in place. Now, the problem that I have is that these clips are designed for a bench top that is between 28 and 40mm thick, and the panels that I'm using for my bench top are only 26mm thick. So my bench tops are a couple of millimeters too narrow for these clamps, and I have tried tightening them up, and they just don't quite tighten enough to be able to get a nice seal around the edge of the sink. So the bench top really needs to be within that range for these clamps to work. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut some little pieces of 7mm ply, and I'm going to go and glue these to the underside of the bench top, just around the edge here, because I've only got this much distance between the edge of the hole and where the frame of my cabinet is on the inside. So it's going to be a bit tricky. But if I glue these onto the underneath of the bench top where the clamps are going, that will essentially make my bench top 26 plus 7. That'll make the bench top 33mm thick, which is inside the range for the clamps to work, and that gives me a much better seal. So that's what I'm going to do first. I'm going to cut a bunch of strips and glue them all around the edge here. And hopefully that will solve the problem. Alright, so you can see all the strips that I've put on around the edge of the bench. So they are super strong. I've glued them and also nailed them in. So they feel really strong. I've also gone around and given them all a really good coat of Cabothane Clear varnish, just to protect them in case any water comes down the edge of the sink. So I mean, that's as much as I can do. Hopefully that will work with the clamps. If not, well, I'm not sure what I'm going to do. Alright, so I've got the bench top in position and I've got it clamped down onto the cabinet so it can't move. And now I'm going to go ahead and screw it in. Well, there it is, guys. Bench top is done, and it is well and truly secured on there. So I've just given it a coat of oil. I'm going to let that dry overnight, and then I'll probably give it a light sand and another coat, and then I'll be ready to continue on with the next thing. This was a bit of a mammoth effort to get this bench top on, but I'm really happy with how it's turned out, and it'll match the other one on the other side really nicely when the rest of the walls are cladded. Yeah, stoked with that.